Today's stories are of a sexual nature and share the consequences of when people's freedoms to be themselves are restricted by a judgmental world. I'm Tony, and I share true crime. Hell in Mill Valley. He couldn't help but smile when he pushed the door open from the kitchen to the living room and didn't distinguish what piece of flesh belonged to whom. Legs and arms intertwined in a big festival of fluids. His long-wanted fantasy was fulfilled in flesh and bone. The drinks in his hand slipped away and smashed on the floor. It wasn't a random occurrence. It was fate knocking at the door, foretelling doom. He smiled and made some more margaritas before jumping back into the action. Michael Ronser didn't know at that moment that he had a one-way ticket to the other side inside the pocket of his jacket, lying gracelessly inside the pile of clothes on the floor. But before the events that unfolded on that fateful night and the following afternoon of September on the shoreline of the Pacific took place, the lifestyle was the number one priority in the couple's calendar. According to key witnesses, friends, and colleagues, the Rosners took part in a growing community of swingers in their hometown of Mill Valley, California. This meant going beneath the underground. The small-town gossip in this town with a population of 14,000 people meant hell for the community. Nobody wanted anybody to know their dark secrets, and that kind of news spread around like gunpowder. Therefore, small-town swingers like them gathered in forgotten places, basements, hideouts, anything without windows, with no witnesses. They were a growing group of humans who wanted to push the boundaries of their small-town, corseted minds far away by exploring each other and the limits of the heart, the mind, and the body. Being married for 15 years and fighting to reignite a spark that had gone away for the nth time after Michael had been caught being unfaithful to Catherine, they happened to smoke a joint at the Wasser's basement. According to the allegation presented by Jocelyn Maybelle Wasser, things got kinda kinky, and both couples ended up undressing and having sex in front of each other. That was the first step. The four felt awkward and waited for the wave of small-town hatred, but were delighted to find their secret was safe with each other. Discretion was crucial, prudence a necessity. That meeting was followed by a second one in which they touched each other and had a slight foreplay with the partner of the opposite member. It was only half a year and a lot of talking later that the two couples finally fulfilled the first swap. Catherine found comfort in the arms of Eric Wasser. He was tall and had a well-built, hard-worked body he was very proud of. She could feel his pectoral muscles pressing when he held her in the air. The opposite couch in the same basement was witnessing how Michael and Jocelyn explored each other with their hands. Jocelyn was a wild card. A Sylvan woman with a take-no-prisoner attitude that secretly drew Michael crazy. She was everything Catherine wasn't. Just as Eric's arms offered Catherine the shelter and confidence Michael had never given her, Jocelyn opened up a new gateway in Michael's head. A possibility for the wilderness. The stage was set for tragedy. It could be felt in the air as they walked back into their respective couples' companies at night. It was an awkward puzzle seen from afar. Jocelyn, lying half-naked in her king-size bed next to Eric, was thinking of Michael's soft touch and tender smile, while Eric dreamt of squeezing Catherine next to him. On the other side of town, Michael was sleepless and staring at the ceiling, picturing the face Jocelyn made when she ferociously jumped over him. It was half smile, half madness. It was captivating. Next to him, but lying on her side with her hands between her thighs, was Catherine, longing for Eric's firm grip and big rough hands on her skin. All the elements were set for the tragedy that was about to occur. The participants were on the verge of the abyss, but nobody did anything about it. They just let the events unfold naturally, denying anything was happening at all. Michael and Catherine hadn't known each other long before getting married. It was one of those times when love's lightning hits so hard that there's no way of avoiding it. Both knew immediately that what lay ahead was a long, winding road of love. Their fate was sealed with the first glance. It was Catherine's smile. She had known it all her life. Whenever she smiled, people around her felt the sun was rising on the horizon. Michael was dazzled, instantly taken into that foreign galaxy her eyes represented. Catherine felt Michael's eyes had a little spice behind the facade of a dedicated, brilliant surgeon. Michael had been an adventurer in his younger years, a bon vivant. He had been to many orgies before and had been involved in more than one non-monogamous relationship. Yet the last time he had an open couple with his ex-girlfriend, the story ended in disaster. He went back home to find them in the hot tub, breaking all the rules they had established. No matter how bitter that memory was, and Michael knew how hard he had to fight to outgrow that breakup, swinging and group sexual activities had always been his fantasy. At the trial, Michael's parents informed the authorities that they had been in the lifestyle for a while in the wild 80s, and that he might have seen something at the age of 6. He pursued that fantasy all his life, and those ideas had cost him more than one relationship in the past. Moreover, the deep effects of a traumatizing image at such an early age proved to be the one thing that began the chain of events that ended in his early death. But the first years with Catherine made that hunger go away. The almighty, lustful desire that had fueled his days for decades slowly turned into a slow, tender, beautiful festival of joyful moments. He just felt he needed nothing else at the time. Yet once Catherine and him grew a little apart, that voracious need for another body became a burning force again. Michael could feel the beast waking up inside of him, and he was equally happy as he was worried. He did what he knew he couldn't do. He just didn't have the courage to tell his wife about his wild fantasies. Catherine said in the trial he acted like a coward back then. Instead of being honest, he slept around, cheating on me. Michael thought Catherine, the woman with the $1 million smile, would never agree to an orgy or a swinger club. He was wrong as a man can be. It was Catherine who started undressing him in the basement that night. She had her own reasons for wanting what Michael wanted. She was a broken woman. Her role as a lab director required character and an iron fist. She was implacable. She could find and solve problems wherever they would hide, in the lab, at home, or anywhere else. Under the strictness, she was falling apart. Fighting the small-town gossip, the smiles behind the looks because they knew her husband was unfaithful to her was proving too much even for her. Michael's infidelities were well known and commented on around town. But it wasn't just that. She had learned to play the fool to the piercing look of curious neighbors. After he had been unfaithful to her half a dozen times, she realized that what was maddening for her wasn't the fact that he had sex with the other women. She wasn't jealous of the girls. She was jealous of him. She wanted to do it too. Being raised by an utterly Catholic family, sex and everything related to lust was the work of the devil. She felt her urges, her unholy, dirty, kinky desires and fantasies needed to be repressed and hidden very well. Catherine, as she said on trial, was in debt with God for being such a filthy woman. She was convinced she was being sinful and that God was going to punish her for it. That night, the first night in the basement, she saw the opportunity to live her own fantasy of being watched and took it. She secretly loved being watched. But what Catherine didn't know was that taking that opportunity was opening a door for tragedy. Eric and Jocelyn, on the other hand, were a tight-knit knot. She had been married twice before. Her first marriage had been a failure. She was only 19 and married a violent man. Her second marriage had left her a widower. It all happened within only 10 years. By 30, she was a wreck emotionally and had severe trust issues. Her world had been shaken one too many times. She thought she could never love again. Her third marriage was to Eric, someone who offered her a sense of relief, comfort, and shelter in a crazy world. She grabbed onto that dream Eric offered her, and together they sailed away into happiness. Eric was a motorsport fanatic, the third of 5 brothers raised between screws, bolts, gas, and car oil on the outskirts of the city. He was bigger than all his brothers and spent hours in the gym every week. He liked the attention and worked out relentlessly looking at himself in the mirror. According to an old gym pal, Bruce Sistick, He would sweat profusely and walk around with a smile after lifting more weight than anybody else in that shift. The more effort he made, the happier he was. Everything Eric did, he did it to the extreme. He loved pushing the boundaries of what he could do. At first, his endless drive and childlike bottomless reservoir of energy had haunted Jocelyn, who was coming out of a dark abyss made of sadness, sorrow, and anger. Eric was pure light and power, and they fell in love immediately. He moved into her house, and they got married with a straightforward ceremony in their own backyard. Only close family and friends were invited. That was 10 years before these events took place. A decade before they witnessed the Rosners have sex in their basement and thought of more. That same thought, the thought of wanting more, was the one that brought other people to the groups that congregated every third Thursday night at the Wassers' basement. The evenings would start at the living room with some drinks and joints, and the couples would then move on to the second stage, which was the basement. What looked like a normal social meeting transformed into a swinger orgy in which companions were shared and exchanged. Each couple had their rules, and each couple decided how much they wanted to experiment each night. The small-town gossip was out of the question because all couples wanted more of what they were getting, and knew all hell would break loose if they said anything. There's no underestimating the destructive power of the wave of hatred you can feel in places like that just for being different. During the trial, the defense tried to use this scenario as a way to get a gentler sentence, but failed. Not even that could be a justification for the event that took place on September 30th, 2022. The violence and the insane levels of hatred that transpired from the wounds inflicted that day couldn't have been just because of the hell unleashed when the news about the gatherings got out. There had to be more than just social pressure for a body to be found in that condition. The jury dismissed every attempt the defense made to establish it as the driver of the horrendous crime. The sentence reflected it perfectly. A few months after the initial gathering, the group decided to go to the beach for a weekend of partner swapping fun. Michael proposed the idea and was also the one who booked the Airbnb in Half Moon Bay. The windows overlooked the wild ocean, and the ochre light of the sunset bathed an entire place during the golden hour. The 7 couples got there late in the afternoon of Saturday, September 29th, and were welcomed by that spectacle. Each chose a bedroom in the giant mansion and settled in. The night was going to be wild and long, so all of them got ready for the marathon. The house was amazing. The bedrooms were cozy and the smiles were multiplying in the faces of the guests. The savage, outrageous outfits said a lot about the willingness to push boundaries and dive deeper into the lifestyle each of them had. As they walked softly to the main room set up perfectly with cushions, beds, red lights, and lounge music, the atmosphere was perfect for sharing their bodies and partners. That was exactly what happened. The scenes in which husband and wife would swap or watch reproduced all around the room. Michael couldn't believe it. His wildest fantasy was being fulfilled. He was in a relationship with a woman she loved who was okay with his living his open sex fantasy. But that wasn't all. He was also intimate with a woman who was a firecracker and who drove him crazy. Inside his head, he was the luckiest man alive. Thinking about that, he went into the kitchen to make drinks. He was totally naked, and the size of his smile couldn't fit his face. As he stirred the margaritas, the thought of wild Jocelyn became a lucid dream and a real close possibility. He left the kitchen, and the sight of the couples intertwined was so hot for him the margaritas fell to the floor. He prepared some more and went back into the action. As soon as he made it back, he looked for her and grabbed her by the hand. He told her exactly what he was thinking about the lifestyle, and Catherine and her. Jocelyn grew wilder when she heard the word firecracker and jumped on him. Meanwhile, Catherine was jumping on Eric on the other side of the room. They were immersed in a hug that was a little more than sexual. As Catherine felt Eric inside her, she felt she was closer to home. The idea of leaving Michael and finding solace and warmth in Eric's arms suddenly became a possibility. She went closer to his ear and whispered exactly that to him. She said, "I want to leave him. I want to live with you. I want you inside of me every day. Let's end the sin. Let's be together, just you and me." Eric was surprised at what she said, but felt delighted to be the object of her desire. Yet, he didn't feel the same as she did. What he got the most out of the lifestyle was the attention. He felt women looked at him, and that was fulfilling. The thirst for protagonism he had felt all his life was suddenly quenched by a myriad of faces of pleasure he could see in the women he was with at the gatherings. He knew he couldn't respond, so he just said, "Yes, Kat, oh yes, I know you feel me," trying to take the conversation elsewhere. Yet Catherine wasn't a woman who could just deflect. She put her nails to his skin and said, "I'm serious, Eric. I want more of you in me, more of you in my life. Don't tell me you don't feel the same. I saw you looking at me. I know you love me." Cornered, but with a sky-high self-esteem, Eric got up and, without removing himself from Catherine, walked to the middle of the room and left her on a bed before walking away silently to look for another partner. That was his way of saying no thanks. A cruel, wordless way that made Catherine snap out of it and go fetch him. As soon as she turned him around from the forearm and started screaming, the first flash hit the glass walls. All the people in the flesh pile at the center of the room became self-aware and started getting dressed in the scarce, see-through clothes they had taken to the gathering. The flashes went one after another, while on the other side of the room, Jocelyn jumped off Michael to get dressed. Michael stayed, sitting in awe as he saw the bright light through the huge glass panels that made the walls. Fear took over the room as everybody ran out of the scene, carrying whatever clothes they had, and locked into their rooms. The following day, after they made it back in silence after canceling the second day of the Airbnb, the real problem started. The photos of Eric and Catherine arguing naked, and the pictures of Michael and Jocelyn got to Eric's parents and family. He received messages from all his family, including far relatives, and the feared wave of small-town hatred started hitting shore with the Wasser residents through social media. According to neighbor and friend Lindy Salgado, who testified in the trial, she could hear the screaming between Eric and Jocelyn. She said she could overhear her screaming about an infidelity. Eric's cell phone was blowing up with messages of hatred and also mocking him for Jocelyn and Michael, and it became too much for me to handle, as Eric testified in the trial. He stormed off the house mindlessly, and as he said in front of the judge, "Boiling is a broken radiator." He also said he got in his car mindlessly to drive somewhere far from Jocelyn in the world. Yet his destiny was Michael's house. In his crooked thinking, Michael was to blame for his falling from the pedestal he was on the previous night to the state of shame and grief he was in the next morning. He was the one who started it all, the cheater, the one who wanted to be with everyone in town. Inside the Rosner residence, a huge fight broke out between Catherine and Michael. He was reliving the ghost of his ex-girlfriend and her lover in the bathtub and furious at Catherine's betrayal. They were arguing violently when Eric started banging at the front door, full of hate and in a state he then recalled as blurred by anger. This sequence of events was told to him by Catherine during the trial. She declared in tears that he was enraged beyond reason and that he just came in to kill Michael. He decided. I could see it in his eyes. Despite Michael fighting back, Eric punished him with punches to the face. Then he lifted Michael and threw him against the marble counter in the kitchen. When Michael tried to say something with his blood-filled mouth, Eric punched him again, and again, and again, until he was left panting with his fists covered in blood over the disfigured corpse of Michael Rosner. The jury found Eric Wasser guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although justice being served was a relief for the Rosner family, Catherine and Jocelyn moved out of their once quiet town to the big city where anonymity could be found. Despite none of them being left in town, the story of Michael, Catherine, Jocelyn, and Eric became a lesson. An ethereal, unwritten rule about the dangers of violence as a way of responding to violence. A way of reminding the community that the social pressure and hatred towards those who are different can create a spiral of anger, ferocity, and anxiety. An anxiety that might end in death.